You know, we're here in front of St. Martin's Episcopal Church where that funeral will take place in just a few hours. People have been lining up all night to pay respect. Former Secretary of State James Baker, of course, he's Mr. Bush's best friend, and grandson George P. Bush will deliver eulogies this morning. USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page covered both Bush presidencies. This morning, she writes about the contrast between former President Bush and President Trump during yesterday's state funeral, calling it, quote, impossible to miss. We all saw it. Well, Susan wrote the upcoming book, The Matriarch, Barbara Bush and the Making of an American Dynasty. She will be inside the church for today's funeral. Susan, good morning.
Good morning.
It is the second big funeral for the Bush family that this church has hosted this past year. Tell us what you're expecting to see inside in a little bit.
You know, yesterday we saw a grand state funeral with former presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens. This is the hometown church for George and Barbara Bush. This is where the community that welcomed him when he came home crushed in January 1993, having lost his bid for re-election. So I think this is going to be cozier and homier, and it's going to be more personal than what we saw yesterday.
They've been members of this congregation for 50 years. Barbara Bush was here every single weekend and participated in all of their events. James Baker, we saw that moving moment where Reverend Levinson talked about those final moments of the president's life where James Baker was rubbing his feet, and in a rare moment we saw him break down and start crying. What are you expecting to hear from his eulogy today?
You know, they have a friendship that's knitted in tragedy in some ways, because they became very close friends when George H.W. Bush helped Jim Baker through the great tragedy of his life, the death of his first wife. And then they became this incredibly powerful political partnerships in campaigns and in administration, Secretary of State when George H.W. Bush was president. So the depth and breadth of this friendship can hardly be overstated. And I'm sure that, and you know, the Bushes cry all the time. It is rare to see Jim Baker cry. That was quite the moment yesterday.
It was a beautiful moment. Norah and I, we're being a little subjective here. We know what this state meant to the former president. But from your perspective, how important was his adoptive home state?
Oh, it meant everything. He almost escaped from New England because he wanted to make his own way after serving in World War II. And Texas is where he chose to do this. Texas is where he both made his fortune, built an oil business, and also launched a remarkable political career here in the Southwest. And you know, at that time, this was where a lot of ex-GIs were moving. It was where there was a lot of growth, both in terms of the population and the economy. And it was a place of opportunity for men and women of ambition.
Yeah, it really was a place where they built a family and a life here, and the state really welcomed them back. I have to tell you, and thank you so much, Susan. It's great to see you, and we'll talk to you after the funeral as well.
Nice to see you.